before COVID, I was also working on cruise ships once in a while. I don't know if you've ever been on a cruise. If you have or haven't, every cruise begins with the lifeboat drill. And you know what my favorite part of any lifeboat drill is? When they show you that little whistle. Nothing says instant rescue quite like. That'll bring the Coast Guard right in, won't it? You're bobbing around in the ocean. They're 2,000 feet up in a noisy helicopter. Shh, shh, shh. Oh, they're there, right there. You know, killer whales also communicate with a whistling sound. You know what that whistling noise means in the orca language? Smorgasbord, right this way.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Enemies of My Country Saturday, August the 26th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Rules for Retrogrades, Sean Hannity, Fox News, Vivek-Ramaswamy, Alex Epstein, OANN, Bishop-Barron, and Chapter 2 of Enemies of My Country. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder, and a boy
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The fact that our self-regard finds expression in a desire for approval offers an opening for moral education, for moderating both our passions and our animal appetites to make civilized life possible. This is the beginning of social order and of self-restraint, and so the first impulse to moral conformity and common social norms. Yuval Levin. The requirement of a moral landscape in an open economy is unfortunately at odds with the reality of fallen human nature. And yet, norms, institutions, and traits exist that can, all at once, benefit from man's moral advancement and facilitate more of the same. The moderation of sinful instincts not only creates greater communion for man with God, but it makes possible the social order in which virtue can lead to prosperity.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now an Ayn Rand quote. Quote, "Nothing can corrupt and disintegrate a culture or a man's character as thoroughly as does the precept of moral agnosticism. The idea that I must never pass moral judgment on others, that I must be morally tolerant of anything, that the good consists of refusing to distinguish good from evil. It is obvious who profits and who loses by such a precept. It is not justice or equal treatment that you grant to me when you abstain equally from praising my virtues and from condemning my vices. When your impartial attitude declares, in effect, that neither the good nor the evil should expect anything from you. Whom do you betray and whom do you encourage?" Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Why is there something rather than nothing? It's an ancient perennial question. The point I'd like to make is it's a properly philosophical question. It's not a scientific question, not a question that can be adjudicated by physics, chemistry, or astronomy, because they're always looking at events and objects and measurable states of affairs within a finite contingent system. And that's fine. That's what the sciences are built to do. But when you ask the question we just asked, that's not a deeper level scientific question. It's a different type of question that takes you out of the epistemological framework of the sciences and introduces you to a higher epistemological framework. One of the problems we face is scientism. One of its dimensions is a tendency to see philosophy as primitive science. They wish they could do real science. What they're doing is some kind of underdeveloped science. No, what they're doing is something qualitatively different than what the sciences do. The collapsing of all the epistemic orders into the scientific is one of the marks, negative marks of our time. Why is there...
And that was Bishop Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a tweet from Sean Hannity, and it's a recording of a woman in Hawaii with something to say to President Biden.
So today, I haven't had any money come in. I haven't had anybody call me back. I didn't have anything. I have no idea. I lost my house. I lost my car. I lost my animals. I mean, come on, man. We're not getting anything. Till today, I still didn't get my meds. I cannot get my meds yet. My medicine was all burnt in my house. My rent money was all burnt in my house. I have no money anymore. I think Joe Biden should take his $700 and get back on the fucking plane and go home. That's what I think. Because $700 compared to all the millions he's giving to Ukraine, why? We need it. That's why we don't understand why. We're citizens and we cannot get money. But if they're not citizens, they get gazillions of dollars from the USA. Where's our government? Fix your house before you fix somebody else's house.
Is this how, like, your community, other Hawaiians you know, locals, indigenous people, is that how they feel, pretty much how you feel?
Everybody feels that way. Come on. That's why the local people stick together and we help our own people because we know the outside people are not going to do it. So today,
And so, yes, that was from Sean Hannity's account. A woman who lost everything tells President Biden to get back on his effing plane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The demagogue as prosecutor and hypnotist. Recent happenings in our own country indicate clearly that the methods used to satisfy a quest for power show a universal pattern. The ancient magic masks used to frighten the people may have been replaced by an overconfident show of physical strength by a hero artificially shaped as an object of admiration and identification for infantile minds. But the loud noises of propaganda are still with us, magnified 1,000-fold by the radio and television, and serving to intimidate and hypnotize our less alert contemporaries. A worldwide audience watching and listening to the demagogue playing all his different roles, the righteous accuser, the martyred victim, the voice of conscience, is temporarily thrown into a semi-rigid, trance-like state of exhausted inattentiveness through the monotonous repetition of threats, accusations, and cliches. The demagogue, like the totalitarian dictator, knows well how to lay a mental spell on the people, how to create a kind of mass suggestion and mass hypnosis. There is no intrinsic difference between individual and mass hypnosis. In hypnosis, the most intensified form of suggestion, the individual becomes temporarily automatized, both physically and mentally. Such clinical state of utter mental submission can be brought about quite easily in children and in primitive people, but it can be created in civilized adults too. Some of the American POWs in Korean prison camps were reduced to precisely this condition. The more the individual feels himself to be a part of the group, the more easily he can become the victim of mass suggestion. This is why primitive communities, which have a high degree of social integration and identification, are so sensitive to suggestions. Sorcerers and magicians can often keep an entire tribe under their spell. Most crowds are rather easy to influence and hypnotize because common longings and yearnings increase the suggestibility of each member of the group. Each person has a tendency to identify with the rest of the group and with the leader as well. And this makes it easy for the leader to hold these people in his grip. As Hitler said in Mein Kampf, the leader can count on increasing submissiveness from the masses. Sudden fright, fear, and terror were the old-fashioned methods used to induce hypnosis, and they're still used by dictators and demagogues. Threats, unexpected accusations, even long speeches and boredom may overwhelm the mind and reduce it to a hypnotic state. Another easy technique is to work with specially suggestive words, repeating them monotonously. Arouse self-pity. Tell the people that they have been betrayed and that their leaders have deserted them. From time to time, the demagogue has to add a few jokes. People like to laugh. They also like to be horrified, and the macabre especially attracts them. Tell them gory tales and let them huddle together in sensational tension. They'll probably develop an enormous awe for the man who frightens them, and will be willing to give him the chance to lead them out of their emotional terror. In the yearning to be freed from one fear, they may be willing to surrender completely to another. Radio and television have enhanced the hypnotizing power of sounds, images, and words. Most Americans remember very clearly that frightening day in 1938 when Orson Welles' broadcast of the invasion from Mars sent hundreds of people scurrying for shelter, running from their homes like panicky animals trying to escape a forest fire. The Welles broadcast is one of the clearest examples of the enormous hypnosuggestive power of the various means of mass communication, the tremendous impact that authoritatively broadcast nonsense can have on intelligent, normal people. It is not only the suggestive power of these media that gives them their hypnotizing effect. Our technical means of communication make of the people one huge participating mass. Even when I am alone with my radio, I am technically united with the huge mass of other listeners. I see them in my mind. I unconsciously identify with them. And while I am listening, I am one with them. Yet I have no direct emotional contact with them. It is partly for this reason that radio and television tend to take away active, affectionate relationships between men to destroy the capacity for personal thought, evaluation, and reflection. They catch the mind directly, giving people no time for calm, dialectical conversations with their own minds, with their friends, or with their books. The voices from the ether don't permit the freedom-arousing mutuality of free conversation and discussion, and thus provoke greater passive acceptance, as in hypnosis. Many people are hypnophiles, anxious to daydream and day sleep throughout their lives. These people easily fall prey to mass suggestion. The lengthy oration or the boring sermon either weakens the listener and makes them more ripe for the mass spell, or makes them more resentful and rebellious. Long speeches are a staple of totalitarian indoctrination because finally the boredom breaks through our defenses. We give in. Hitler used this technique of mass hypnosis through monotony to enormous advantage. He spoke endlessly and included long, dull recitals of statistics in his speeches. The din of constant verbal intimidation of the public is a recognized tool of totalitarian strategy. The demagogue uses this suggestive technique too, as well as the more tricky maneuver of attacking opponents who are usually considered to be beyond suspicion. This maneuver is often combined with a renewed appeal to self-pity. 14 years of disgrace and shame was the slogan Hitler used to slander the very creative period between the armistice of 1918 and the year he seized the helm. 20 years of treason, a slogan used in our country not too long ago, sounds suspiciously like it, and is all too familiar to anyone who watched Hitler's rise and fall. The stab-in-the-back myth reduces everyone who is taken in by it to the level of suspicious childhood. This inflammatory oratory aims toward arousing chaotic and aggressive responses in others. The demagogue doesn't mind temporary verbal attacks on himself. Even slander can delight him, because these attacks keep him in the headlines and in the public eye, and may help increase people's fear of him. Better to be hated and feared than forgotten. The demagogue grows fat on prolonged and confused discussion of his behavior. It serves to paralyze the people's mind and to obscure completely the real issues behind his red herrings. If this continues long enough, people become fed up. They give in. They want to sleep. They are willing to let the big hero take over. And the sequel can be totalitarianism. As a matter of fact, Nazism and fascism both gambled on the fear of communism as a means of seizing power for themselves. What we have recently experienced in this country, unplanned though it doubtless is frighteningly similar to the first phase of the deliberate totalitarian attack on the mind by slogans and suspicions. Violent, raucous noise provokes violent emotional reactions and destroys mental control. When the demagogue starts to rant and rave, his outbursts tend to be interpreted by the general public as proof of his sincerity and dedication. But for the most part, such declarations are proof of just the opposite and are merely part of the demagogue's power-seeking strategy. There is in existence a totalitarian document on terror which discusses in detail the use of well-planned, repeated, successive waves of terror to bring the people into submission. Each wave of terrorizing Cold War creates its effect more easily after a breathing spell than the one that preceded it, because people are still disturbed by their previous experience. Morale becomes lower and lower, and the psychological effect of each new propaganda campaign becomes stronger. It reaches a public already softened up. Every dissenter becomes more and more frightened that he may be found out. Gradually, people are no longer willing to participate in any sort of political discussion or to express their opinions. Inwardly, they have already surrendered to the terrorizing dictatorial forces. We must learn to treat the demagogue and aspirant dictator in our midst just as we should treat our external enemies in a Cold War, with the weapon of ridicule. The demagogue himself is almost incapable of humor of any sort, and if we treat him with humor, he will begin to collapse. Humor is, after all, related to a sense of perspective. If we can see how things should be, we can see how askew they can get, and we can recognize distortion when we are confronted with it. Put the demagogue's statements in perspective, and you will see how utterly distorted they are. How can we possibly take them seriously or answer them seriously? We have important business to attend to. Matters of life and death, both for ourselves as individuals and for our nation as a whole. The demagogue relies for his effectiveness on the fact that people will take it seriously, the fantastic accusations he makes. Will discuss the phony issues he raises as if they had reality, or will be thrown into such a state of panic by his accusations and charges that they will simply abdicate their right to think and verify for themselves. The fact is, the demagogue is not appealing to what is rational and mature in man. He is appealing to what is most irrational and most immature. To attempt to answer his ravings with logic is to attempt the impossible. First of all, by so doing, we accept his battling premises. And we can find ourselves trapped in an argument on terms he has chosen. It is always easier to defeat an enemy on your own ground and by choosing your own terms. In addition, the demagogue either is, or pretends to be, incapable of the kind of logic that makes discussion and clarification possible. He is a master at changing the subject. It is worse than criminal for us to get ourselves involved in endless, pointless, and inevitably vituperative arguments with men who are less concerned with truth, social good, and real problems than they are with gaining unlimited attention and power for themselves. In their defense against psychological attacks on their freedom, the people need humor and good sense first. Consistent approval or silent acceptance of any terror-provoking strategy will result only in the downfall of our democratic system. Confusion undermines confidence. In a country like ours, where it is up to the voting public to discern the truth, a universal knowledge of the methods used by the demagogue to deceive or to lull the public is absolutely necessary.
And that was the demagogue is prosecutor and hypnotist from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. Rule 2.
Rule 2. Conservatism is inherently Christian. Intellectual conservatism is inherently Roman Catholic. In America specifically, conservatism's guts have been Protestant, but its brains must be Catholic. It is true in Western civilization generally. This is because Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, together with the Christian scripture and tradition, informed the unique basis of all that's good in ancient and medieval Europe, which created Western culture. The retrograde needs to be aware of this and spread the message. The best of American values and Western triumphalism reduces to the teachings of Aristotomism. Aristotle lays out the sine qua nons for Western anthropology, justifying the interaction between man's free will, habit, virtue, politics, and culture. St. Thomas most aptly shows how Christian tradition and scripture perfected these Aristotelian building blocks of culture. Goodies like natural rights and limited government emanate uniquely from this source. But in recent centuries, Aristotle and St. Thomas deliberately have been robbed of their due credit. On the right hand, the Reformation rejected this Aristotomist basis for Western culture at behest of sola scriptura. On the left hand, the Enlightenment made the same dismissal, except premised upon anti-Christian scientism. In other words, the two movements rejected Aristotomism for opposite reasons. Things played out interestingly in America. When their Protestant Enlightenment worldview came up wanting, the American founders and colonial and antebellum American culture secretly drew heavily on Aristotomism, while unabashedly denouncing Aristotle and Thomas. These two figures are basically the American retrogrades' dark knights, gathering all the unique blame and none of the due credit. All republics live out a three-phase life cycle. First, breaking the old regime, and then making the new regime, and finally, staking the new regime in the culture. Aristotomism proves indispensable for all three phases. This is seen in American history specifically and in all republics generally. Breaking the old regime. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence announced the breaking of the English rule over the American colonies. In the American Republic, before it was even technically a republic, founders such as Thomas Jefferson and John Adams secretly drew on a Thomist natural rights tradition. Footnote: the natural rights tradition includes thinkers like Robert Bellarmine and Protestant political thinkers who drew on Bellarmine and Aquinas. End of footnote. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams secretly drew on a Thomistic natural rights tradition in formulation and defense of the Declaration of Independence. Although the young colonies were peopled by Protestants outwardly hostile to Thomism, the natural rights of the Declaration proved to be unimaginable and incoherent without Thomas Aquinas's arrangement thereof, making the new regime. In 1787 and 1788, the drafting and ratifying of the U.S. Constitution memorialized the making of the new American regime, premised upon the violations of American rights enumerated in the previous decade's Declaration. Framers of the U.S. Constitution, like James Madison, recognized that natural rights in republics were best secured by localism, a principle derived from the Catholic concept of subsidiarity. Once again, this Republican desideratum came from the overlooked or maligned lineage of classical thinkers such as Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Robert Bellarmine, the Spanish theologians of the school of Salamanca, and Montesquieu. Madison and the framers called the concept federalism, not subsidiarity, although it proves to be a simple Reformation Enlightenment reproduction thereof. Staking the new regime in the culture. All the American founders and framers agreed that a good new constitution accomplished nothing without implantation within a virtuous political culture. In other words, the real life of a republic is lived after its foundational documents have been ratified. The baton, as it were, needed to be passed from 1770s revolutionaries and 1780s constitutionalists to the everyday American of the 1790s and thereafter. Yet even within a Protestant citizenry, this required all the marks of a Catholic people: virtue ethics in the populace, a Christian humanism based upon a sacramental order, a family economy, and a science and technology sector based upon Aristotelian realism. All these elements of culture required a Thomistic view of the human person, even as the young republic technically rejected the church's insistence upon it. While ecumenical conservative values can be broadly construed as Christian without contradiction, now busted is the tired old myth about the congruity between Puritan political acumen, which denies outright the possibility of liberty and virtue, and American values. The more specifically one wants and labors to ascribe American values to Protestantism, the more vigorously he must be rebuffed. This task falls to the retrograde, as he disabuses misinformed Americans of their political and cultural misconceptions. He replaces Puritanism with Aristotomism as America's intellectual lodestar. Finally, the retrograde must understand that small government can't be accomplished within a morally pluralistic society or over large land masses. Small government requires small spaces with alert, active, virtuous, retrograde citizens prepared to organize themselves in an equal and opposite way to the demands of Saul Alinsky.
And that was Rule 2 for Rules for Retrogrades. And basically what he's saying is that if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you can't be a true conservative. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Fox News, Brian Kilmeade interviews Viktor Shokin, the Ukrainian prosecutor who was fired on the orders of Joe Biden and others while investigating Burisma.
I do not want to deal in unproven facts, but my firm personal conviction is that, yes, this was the case. They were being bribed. The fact that Joe Biden gave away $1 billion in U.S. money in exchange for my dismissal, my firing, isn't that alone a case of...
And that was Fox News, Brian Kilmeade interviewing Viktor Shokin, the Ukrainian prosecutor who was fired. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Vivek-Ramaswamy talks fossil fuels.
The reality is climate-related disaster deaths down 98% over the last century. A lot of people don't know that fact. That's an undisputed fact. Why? Because of more abundant and plentiful access to fossil fuels. 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures as warm ones. What we feared in the 1970s was a supposed ice age if we didn't stop using fossil fuels. Now it's global warming. And so I don't think the climate agenda is really about the climate. I think it's about global equity. It's about letting China catch up to the United States. That's what this farce is about. And it shocks me that the other Republicans on that stage are really just going along with the party line without independently looking at the actual facts and data for themselves. You know, and I follow from Alex Epstein to Bjorn Lomborg to even Steve Koonin, who was a physicist, served in President Obama's energy department. I've read all their books cover to cover. And so this is something where I'm grounded in the facts. I don't just buy the talking points that come through the filtered knowledge synthesis ecosystem in the media. I go to the hard facts, and I will speak with conviction when I say the climate change agenda is a hoax.
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Alex Epstein.
The GMC Hummer EV, that's having a sales problem. The Audi Q8 e-tron, that is having a sales problem. Even though many people say they're interested in EVs, I'm wondering if this is a car problem, if it's a branding problem, or if it's really just a cost problem at the end of the day. Folks are saying, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to drop, as we just showed you, $64,000 on an EV.
I think it's a cost effectiveness problem. So there's an issue of what do you pay for it? What's the cost? And then how effective is it? EVs don't have the range. They don't have the convenience, usually in terms of gasoline vehicles. And again, this bad performance is with huge subsidies and with sort of huge propaganda. You know, a lot of people buy Teslas and EVs, even Hummer EVs. They think this is somehow saving the planet, which I don't think that's a good goal anyway. But it's totally the wrong perspective. I mean, we should be buying cars that are actually good for us, and EV manufacturers should be competing.
And that was Alex Epstein. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Lauren Boebert on OANN.
Let's move already. One of those House members that's had the intestinal fortitude to say, let's impeach Joe, is our next guest, Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Lauren, we had on Congressman, Tim Burchett from Tennessee. We had Andy Ogles on and some others, and Marjorie over the last week or so. And I've asked all of them, are you 100% fine with moving forward when y'all get back from this long-ass break to impeach Joe Biden? They all said yes, but of course, we're waiting on the speaker. Your turn to sound off.
Dan, we absolutely should be back in Washington, D.C. With articles of impeachment for Joe Biden. It's been 2 months since I became the first House Republican in 24 years to force a vote on an impeachment inquiry against a Democrat president. The amount of evidence we have against the Biden crime family warrants impeachment entirely. The House has requested numerous documents to help with investigations into the Biden's family's wrongdoings and have received nothing. We can't can't just sit back and let this clown show continue. They must be held accountable. They are literally imprisoning their political opponents right now, and we are not holding this compromised president accountable. This is our duty to do as House representatives in the majority, and if an inquiry does not take place when we do mosey on back in September, then I will go straight to the House floor, introduce new articles of impeachment for the corruption, for the bribery that we have seen between Joe Biden and Ukrainian oligarchs, and I will force the up or down vote, yes or no, impeach Joe Biden. We are not sending this to another committee if I have to go to the floor and force this vote.
Thank you. And I recall one of our guests in the last 2 weeks had said that. I don't know the proceedings and how you guys have all the different rules of the House, and obviously those new rules were negotiated when Kev took over, but there is this certain vote where a single person can go up and demand a vote on it, correct?
Yes, this is a privileged motion, and I don't care who calls dibs on it. Whoever gets to the House floor first with these articles, I am voting to impeach Joe Biden. We have seen the evidence. I serve on the Oversight Committee, and we have seen thousands of pages of bank records with these shell companies, these 20 LLCs that they have been funneling money from our adversaries to the Biden family. We have the bribery in writing in the FD 1023s. We have the IRS criminal investigators who came in and were heroes. They're whistleblowers, came in before the House Oversight Committee and laid out exactly what Hunter Biden had been doing with his shady business dealings. And now, because of Devin Archer's testimony, we see the correlation between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden in these shady business deals. Joe Biden has never sold anything, but he has sold out the American people.
Can I got to bring something up to you because I thought this was kind of interesting. So I'm sure you watched the Trump-Tucker interview last night instead of the debate. I did both, but later, right? Because I wasn't going to give Fox any ratings and watch their display. But anyway, this is interesting. We know that the DOJ is corrupt as hell. Period, point blank. It's being used as a weaponized tool for JoJo to go after Trump or any political enemies. Case in point, Elon Musk. He's not like a professed conservative Republican MAGA guy, but since he took over Twitter, now X, let's be real, he's been outspoken about government corruption. Did you see this headline, Lauren, that just shocked me? So all of a sudden, Biden's DOJ is suing his main company, SpaceX, for alleged discrimination because he had the audacity, Lauren, to hire all American workers at his factory at SpaceX instead of hiring refugees or asylum seekers that have been allowed in illegally thanks to Joe Biden's southern border. Now, if that's not a weaponized DOJ going after a civilian, not even a political opponent, this is disgusting.
Right. Well, that is what is so disgusting about them going after their political opponents, because it shows that they will stop nowhere. Garland is upset that a private company that works with most world governments and has high-level security clearances won't hire illegal aliens. Garland found Elon in contempt of court and fined the company $350,000 for ignoring a search warrant prosecutors obtained for the information just a few weeks ago. And this is how our DOJ works, Dan. You give them what they want, or they will attack you on all fronts.
Thank you.
Elon refused to play along with them, and now they are coming after him.
Yeah, and it's not just the playing along. I think they're doing it not just because he wouldn't do what he was told like a good boy and hire illegals. They're not Americans. But it's also because of what he's been doing on Twitter. Think about it. He has come out and posed tons of questions in his tweets about this regime, about Joe, about Hunter and the laptop. You've seen the tweets. So this is blatant weaponization. Like, this guy's been talking a lot of trash, Mr. President. What should we do? Well, let's go find him, investigate his business, and try and give him a black mark. Really?
Well, we owe Elon a big, huge thanks for the Twitter files that were released. If not for those
too,
it would be even more difficult for us to expose the revolving door between the FBI and big tech. They've been censoring Americans for far too long, and he is exposing everything that they are doing. So I am proud of what he's done with Twitter, with X. And, of course, they're going to come after someone who is taking a stand for our Constitution, for our freedom of speech, and now apparently for hiring Americans in America.
Yeah, that one really got me. Like, we're suing you because you hired all Americans. Folks, if you don't see how corrupt this regime is and how anti-American it is, you got your head in the sand or your Donald J. Trump syndrome is taking over. Because this is right in front of us, folks. Last one to you, because it's the news of the day, of course. President Donald Trump, the first president ever to be indicted, 4 times arrested, booked, mugshot, all the garbage that they did today. I want to talk about this House GOP probe because you and I's good friend, another Buckeye, Jim Jordan, just came out and said that you House Republicans will be launching a probe when you get back to work into Fani Willis, the prosecutor down there in Fulton County, into this bogus indictment. Because, I mean, come on, a RICO charge? That's what you charge mafia dudes with, not President Trump or any president. RICO. Racketeering. Come on.
Yes.
What's going to happen with that investigation into her actions?
Well, yeah. So, Dan, 4 days before President Trump was indicted in Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis campaigned on prosecuting President Trump on her website. This entire investigation has been nothing more than a campaign promise to an angry woke mob, which is why my colleagues in the House Judiciary Committee have just opened an investigation into the Fulton County's shameful case against President Trump. They've had 3 years to investigate and charge Trump, yet they waited until election season.
Of course they did.
They waited until they saw how good President Trump looked in every single poll against crooked Joe Biden. So President Trump's interview with Tucker during the debate last night, it surpassed over 200 million views in less than 24 hours. More than 200 million views, Dan.
Yeah.
And
you notice Fox isn't bragging about their viewership,
Trump
right?
Back.
You notice Fox didn't brag about their viewership from the debate. Usually the next day, a network always brags. We got 15 million viewers on last night. I haven't seen Fox post anything, brag, or anything about their viewership. You know why? Because I'm thinking it was a dud. It was a big nothing turd sandwich. And the only one that looked halfway decent was Vivek. The rest of them all looked
did amazing.
Right. The rest of them are all typical in the suit. GOP, I couldn't tell if they're GOP or DNC, let's be real, because they all look like the fake filled suit politicians. Every damn one of them, from Fat Chris Christie to Hutchinson. You were there? I didn't even know you were standing there. Anyway, they're wrapping me up. I know you got to go. So much craziness in our world today and in this country. Thank you for standing up, Warren. And
absolutely, Dan.
I can't wait to see you guys get back to work. And I know that you Freedom Caucus folks are actually going to do the work. Now just get the speaker to call the votes.
And that was Lauren Boebert, who joined, was speaking with Dan Ball from OANN. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, The Enemies of My Country, Chapter 2.
2. Charlottesville, Virginia, USA. I let myself into the house quietly, trying not to jangle the keys in the lock. Gently closing and locking the door behind me, I turned toward the entryway and living room, lit by the soft glow of various lamps that Layla had left on. I set down my bag and walked forward, tracing my hand atop a long white side table adorned with potted plants and family pictures. Passing through my living room on the way to the kitchen, I paused to take in my surroundings. They should have felt familiar. A suburban oasis, a beautiful home by anyone's standards, made more so by Layla's decorative touch, and warmed further by the toys and stuffed animals scattered about faster than they could be picked up. How often had I passed through these surroundings, barely recognizing the splendor around me? Nearly every day for the past year, and yet it felt like I was seeing it all for the first time. On an average day, I took my home for granted. Having just returned from the frantic chaos of Syria, it seemed like I was passing through some alien wonderland that I didn't deserve. I made my way to the cabinet, retrieving the trusty bottle of Woodford Reserve and pouring 3 fingers over ice. Then I sat at the dining room table, taking the first warming sips of bourbon. By my 3rd pull from the glass, I was back on the high ground, waiting for Bari Khan's convoy to enter the kill zone, and by the 4th I was trying to pry the Syrian girl from my side so I could resume fighting alongside my team in the village. Those memories seemed real, concrete. By contrast, the normal home, the all-American life I had re-entered seemed to be some foggy, half-remembered dream. I took another sip. A creak from the top of the stairs alerted me that I'd failed to enter quietly enough, and I approached the bottom of the staircase to see Layla descending toward me. Even having been awakened by my return, she was stunning. She wore sweatpants and a thin top without a bra, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in disarray, face puffy with sleep but radiant with all the beauty that had caused me to fall for her in college. "Hey, babe," she whispered. "Hey," I said quietly, receiving her into my embrace and kissing her lips. "I tried not to wake you." "It's okay," she murmured, hugging me tightly before pulling back to appraise me with lucid green eyes. "You're having a drink?" "Yeah, but I'll come to bed. Let's go." "No, I'll join you." "Don't you have to be at work early?" "Yeah, it's okay." I poured her a glass of red wine and carried it to the table, where she took a seat beside me. We raised our glasses and clinked them softly together. She asked, "How was Jordan?" "Hot," I said. "But everything went well." "No issues starting up the contract?" I shook my head. The host nation instructors were really receptive, good rapport right off the bat. They're starting the marksmanship instruction today. We'll see how it goes, but I shouldn't have to go back over until my team lead needs some assistance. "What unit are you guys training again?" She asked the question like a wife trying to verify her husband's whereabouts, and half the time I felt like I was keeping an extramarital affair from her. In a way, I was. 101st SB, I replied automatically. Jordan's special battalion within their special forces group. Kind of like our Rangers. They're good, really motivated and capable. That makes things more interesting for my instructors because they can teach higher level stuff. Should be a great contract. She said nothing, taking another sip as I asked, "Enough about me. How have you and Langley been?" "Langley's so good half the time I feel like she could raise herself." Guess she'd have to be that way to survive my parenting. I can't believe how smart she is, though. It's scary, right? Yeah, I get the creeping suspicion we aren't going to need her college fund. How has residency been going? Layla took another sip of wine, closing her eyes halfway. Can't be over soon enough. Most of my attending physicians are good. The couple have a god complex. I thought that was reserved for surgeons. I know, right? She shrugged. Things the movies never tell you, I guess. Pediatricians with god complexes. The threat is real. The kids are great, though. A few crazy parents here and there. Mostly it's the long hours and studying on top of everything else that makes it hard. 2 more weeks? 17 days, but who's counting? Let's just say I'm glad you're home. By the time I pick up Langley from daycare, I'm ready for bed. And after my parents begged me to move here, I should sue them for false advertising. I smiled, swirling the ice in my glass. Half the reason she'd jostled for a pediatric residency at the University of Virginia Children's Hospital was because her mother and stepfather lived in Charlottesville, where they'd spent years running a successful metalworking business. But they'd recently received an acquisition offer from a corporate chain. After selling the business, they decided to use the substantial proceeds to buy a brown brick townhouse in Alexandria, just over 2 hours away. Now, when I was gone for training or operations, 2 so far, the first in the Philippines, Layla was forced to juggle her job requirements with summer daycare and babysitter schedules to ensure Langley was looked after. Nodding, I said, "Well, I'll be able to help out there. Why don't I take her out this weekend? I'll make a day of it, and you can have some time to yourself." "No, I'll go. I haven't seen you in a week. Last thing I need is time to myself. That much suddenly seemed obvious, but I was new to being a parent and even newer to being a husband, and still felt like I was in a constant cycle of trying to figure out where and how to draw the lines. Right, I agreed. It's a date then. We can take her to Bumble Brews in the morning, then go walking downtown. Find a nice place for lunch and get her ice cream at Chaps. We're going to Chaps? I pushed back my chair and stood, locating my daughter standing in the shadows by the stairs. I could always hear Layla moving throughout the house. Langley, however, was still small enough at age 6 to creep around undetected. Hey, sweetie. I approached and knelt before her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Have you been good for Mommy? Uh-huh, Langley replied. I missed you. I missed you too. Want to see what Daddy got you? I felt her nodding against my shoulder and carried her over to the front door where I'd set down my bag. Unzipping it, I procured a stuffed pink rabbit and handed it to her. She accepted it and pulled it into a hug between us. Is this from Jordan? She murmured sleepily. Yes, from the Amman airport. I love it. I rubbed her back, feeling a mild sense of self-disgust. As much as I hated lying to my wife, I hated lying to Langley even more. The truth was, I'd picked up the toy at a truck stop on the way home, my one and only chance to procure a souvenir for her. Setting her down, I remained kneeling and looked into her tired face. Her curly brunette hair and brown eyes were in stark contrast to Layla and me, which was just as well because she wasn't biologically related to either of us. I looked up to see Layla standing in the lamplight, her expression sterner than I ever seemed to manage in front of our daughter. Langley had me wrapped around her finger, and she knew it better than anyone. Layla said, Sweetie, you're supposed to be asleep. I know, Langley replied. I just heard you guys talking and wanted to see Daddy. Layla shot me a raised eyebrow, and I hoisted Langley against my side to carry her upstairs. Layla and I put her back to bed, her face going slack as she fell back asleep. Leaving her room and quietly closing the door, I turned to Layla. So, how tired are you? Not that tired, she answered. Let's go.
And that was Chapter 2 of The Enemies of My Country by Jason-Kasper. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.